I'm with Tanya L for TanyaLor.com, and today we're interviewing her on one of her books, Love is Like a Flatbed Truck. We have a couple questions for you today from our readers. The first question is, what inspired the title of the book? Because it's a very interesting title.
Thank you for asking that question, because actually the answer to that question is twofold.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, the book was to be called Baked Chicken with String Beans with a Side of Cornbread. And the reason for that was because a very good friend of mine, whose mom at the time was going through Alzheimer's. I think she was in maybe the first or second stage of Alzheimer's.
Right.
And she would prepare meals for her mom. Well, she noticed that her mom would only eat one particular meal, and that was baked chicken, string beans, cornbread. And so I asked her one day, why is it that that's the only thing she eats? And this went on for a couple of years, that she will only eat that every single day.
Right.
And she surmised that this was probably the last meal that she remembered having, which is baked chicken, string beans, and cornbread. So she prepared that every day, and that's all she would eat. If she gave her anything else, she would push it aside. So I got the idea that I was thinking about starting a book at that time, and I didn't have a title. So I thought maybe I'd do an homage to her mom and call the book Baked Chicken, String Beans with a Side of Cornbread.
Right.
And that was the working title for a couple months. But after that, that's when my husband passed away. And it was during one of those moments of frustration and anger and confusion. This may have been maybe 6 months after he passed. I had stopped writing for a while because I was depressed and going through early stages of grief. So I put everything aside. But one particular morning, in the wee hours, maybe around 2 or 3, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't sleeping at all. And I got up and I came downstairs. And I didn't quite know how to express how I was feeling, so I just started yelling at the ceiling and the walls. And I started calling God out. Why did you do this to me? How could you do this to me? And I was so pissed. I was calling him everything but his proper name. And I won't say what names I used, but I'm sure you can imagine. And during that tirade, and it was, he spoke to me. And what I heard in my heart was what I wrote on the back of the book. It was so profound to me, I had to write it down. So I went and I got a pad of paper and I wrote down everything that I heard. And I like to read it to you if I can. It's on the back of the book for everybody to read, but it's very important to me, so I like to share it again. He says, sometimes life is like a head-on collision. It can hit you when you least expect it. Then after you crash, you're left lying in the street all broken and shattered, with pieces of your heart and soul thrown here and there. Then just when you think that absolutely nothing can save you, love shows up like a flatbed truck, and it lowers itself down to where you are. It lifts you up and then carefully carries you away to a safe place where you can be put back together again. And I heard him say to me, I am your safe place. And if you let me, I will put you back together again. And I remember screaming, that don't make any sense. That's stupid. But then after I read it a few times, it began to make sense because I actually felt that way. I felt like I had been in a head-on collision with life. And I had been totally destroyed. And I did not think that my heart could ever be put back together because it was broken in so many pieces. But it was. He was right. And when I read this, I thought, wow. And then he said, love is like a flatbed truck. And I said, yeah, that's pretty good, Lord. I didn't know he was that smart. And so I guess you could say God changed the name of the book because love is like a flatbed truck. And he was my flatbed truck and has been ever since. So that's how that came to be.
I see. Very divinely inspired.
Yes, it was. It really was.
Well, the next question that the readers have for you today has to do with the two main characters of the story. The question is, what inspired the relationship between Penelope and Judith? It's a very unique relationship, and it's not really explored in books nowadays very much. A lot of people think.
Well, that is another interesting story because that story is also a true story. It was an event that took place when I was about 16, maybe 17. I remember hearing a conversation between my mother and a friend of hers. And they were talking about this friend's sister. At the time, she had been in a car accident and she had been paralyzed from her neck down, just like Judith. But what I recall part of the conversation was that it was astounding to her sister one day when she went to visit her sister, that she saw all these people that had come there to visit her, people that she never knew, never saw them before. And she asked some of them that was waiting to see her sister, who are you and why are you here? And they began to express that they were there to speak to her sister. They found out what happened and where she was, and they needed to talk to her. And she asked why. And they expressed that they needed to tell her about how she destroyed their life. Her sister was she enjoyed dating married men, from what I understood. And so in the course of that, she broke up a lot of marriages. And she did destroy a lot of lives, not just for the parents, but for some of the children. And some of those people, when they discovered where she was, they came to the hospital or because she was in a nursing home by this time. And they wanted to tell her what she had done. Well, her sister started not to allow them to do that because she thought it was too cruel. But then, as one of the ladies expressed to her, she had no right to do what she did to us. So how can you say that we have no right to do this? Because we want to tell her what she did to us. Mm-hmm. Because we need to do this. And so she allowed it. She allowed a few to do that because she didn't want to overwhelm her sister. And she sat in a room while they were telling her. And some of the stories they told her were very mean. They were very vile because they were still angry. Don't know, how fresh things were before the accident, of the infidelities or whatever. But she allowed it. And she also shared that there were also people who came to talk with her sister. But these people were not there out of anger. They were there because they had forgiven her. That they had moved on. God had healed them and they were able to move on with their lives. And so they too wanted to express how they felt, but it was for a different reason.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, as she sat and listened to the stories, she noticed a change in her sister. Before, she was not able to cry, but during the course of those visits, she began to cry. She couldn't move. The only thing she could do, just like Judith, was to blink her eyes because she was paralyzed from her neck down, and she couldn't speak because her vocal cords had been damaged in the accident. It was a head-on collision for her. And the only thing she could do was blink her eyes and cry. But that was the first time that any response was given by her sister to anybody, because she would just lay there being paralyzed until these people showed up. And I guess she decided that God must have been doing something, not just for the people, but for her sister. And from my understanding, she stayed in that state for maybe 10 years or more before she passed away. But I remember her telling my mom that when she passed away, she was smiling. She was very peaceful. And she knew that she had reconciled things with God in her heart and in her head. Nobody could hear the conversation, but the Lord, I guess maybe he was the only one who needed to hear it. And she passed away peacefully. So the relationship between Judith and Penelope, that's where that came from. That came from a conversation I overheard with my mom and her friend. And I never thought about that conversation again. I mean, I was 16, 17 at the time. Mm-hmm. I am way older than that now. And so when I started getting ideas for the book, that one came back to me. I had never discussed it with my mother. I had never asked any questions. It was something I overheard, but it stayed in the back of my mind all that time until this book. So, just like the title was Divine Inspiration, I think that was divine inspiration as well. Because things like that happen. You just don't hear about it.
Yeah.
So thanks for asking that question.
Of course. And now on to our final question, which is, what inspired you to write about the adorable four-legged friend of ours?
I guess you're talking about Miss Casey. Mm-hmm. Well, my inspiration for Miss Casey actually came from my dog, Miss Brandy. Because just like in the book, Grant, who was Penelope's deceased husband, she mentioned how Grant used to always say that Casey had her own special brand of doggy wisdom. Well, that was something that my husband used to say about Brandy, that he thought she was just too smart to be a dog, that she had her own little brand of doggy wisdom because she always seemed to know exactly what was being said to her because her reactions was just like, okay, yeah, I got that. So that's where the character for Casey came. And I also use Casey as like a lead for Penelope to kind of be the guide for her to move in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, when you're going through grief and heartache, you don't always make the best decisions. And you kind of need a friend there to kind of push you and nudge you in the right way. And that's what Casey did for Penelope. Right. She nudged her in the right direction and everything turned out okay. So that's where Miss Casey came from.
So this concludes our interview with author Tanya L. Orr. Please be sure to pick up Love is Like a Flatbed Truck from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or anywhere books are sold. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.